Why did Jungkook suddenly freeze at the sight? The entire arena sings, "I am the one to love," with Jin, a shocking moment of self-love and silence and night, filled with roaring cheers and pulsating lights. No one expected the silence of a single BTS member to become the loudest scream of the evening. Why did Jungkook suddenly stop moving, his expression frozen in awe, as the entire arena, thousands of voices, rose in unison to sing, "I am the one I should love"? Why did Seokjin, bathed in light, stand so still, on the verge of tears, reliving a moment that changed his life and the lives of millions? The incident unfolded during the Run Seokjin tour in Anaheim, US, and it was unlike any other segment of the tour. It wasn't the pyrotechnics, nor the choreography, nor even the setlist that made headlines across fandom spaces worldwide. It was the collective emotional detonation that occurred when a stadium of fans, without instruction, without cue, began chanting a lyric that defined one of the most pivotal messages BTS has ever shared: self-love. And at the center of it all was Jin, the eldest member, the soloist, the man once riddled with self-doubt who now stood still, trembling, overwhelmed by the affirmation echoing back at him from a sea of strangers who knew his deepest truth. Jungkook, known for his composure and stage professionalism, stood utterly still. His mic lowered, his body unmoving. His face said everything: shock, gratitude, pain, admiration. This wasn't planned. This wasn't rehearsed. It was real. The youngest BTS member, usually the one to smile through the chaos, appeared momentarily paralyzed by the scene before him, a moment that felt both universal and deeply personal. The entire arena had become one voice, singing a line that had once been born out of Jin's struggle. That line, "I am the one I should love in this world," was more than lyric. It was confession, redemption, and reminder. And on this particular night, it circled back to its source, only louder and purer than ever before. Observers noted that as Jin sat behind the grand piano, the lights dimmed to a haunting clarity. A single spotlight cascaded down upon him, isolating him not in fame, but in raw humanity. It was then that the opening chords of Epiphany began. This wasn't just a performance, it was a reckoning. The intro alone caused fans to hold their breath, but what followed surpassed any expectation. Before Jin could sing the defining lyric, the fans sang it for him. This wasn't a fan chant. It was an act of communion. Tens of thousands of voices reclaiming a line that once helped a man heal himself, and in turn, helped them heal too. The effect on Jin was immediate. His fingers hesitated on the keys. His eyes welled. His lips trembled, but he didn't move. His silence, again, said everything. And Jungkook, who stood only meters away, bore witness to it all. His reaction was captured in multiple fan cams and broadcast through every major fan platform within hours. His eyes were fixed on Jin, mouth slightly agape, as though witnessing a sacred event. He did not blink. He did not speak. The moment carried so much weight, so much memory, so much personal context, that even he, with all his experience, was powerless to the tidal wave of emotion that hit the stage. What made this moment even more seismic was the hidden history behind it. When Jin first performed Epiphany, years ago, it was a personal risk. The song, laden with vulnerability, spoke of self-doubt, pain, and the arduous journey toward accepting one's worth. For an idol raised in an industry that often demanded perfection, silence, and suppression, to publicly declare, "I am the one I should love," was radical. It was not just a message to fans, it was a message to himself. And it came at a time when Jin was battling internal turmoil, questioning his position, and seeking value beyond the spotlight. Now, years later, to have that very lyric sung back to him with thunderous clarity by a stadium of fans was the closing of a circle. It was healing returned, love received. And the weight of that realization brought the most stoic of performers to the edge of tears. Jungkook's stillness wasn't due to confusion. It was due to recognition. Recognition of what that moment meant. Recognition of the journey Jin had taken. Recognition of his own silent struggles mirrored in the lyrics now shouted by a global crowd. For a member who has repeatedly credited the older members for his growth, who has often shown deep emotional awareness beneath his quiet confidence, this was a moment that overwhelmed the performer and awakened the person. The concert continued, but those minutes would remain etched in every fan's memory. Fan footage, camera captures, and real-time reactions quickly flooded online platforms, but none could fully contain the gravity of the shared emotional eruption that had occurred in Anaheim. Many fans admitted they were crying not just because the moment was beautiful, but because they too had once clung to that lyric during their darkest days. Jin had written it for himself, but in doing so, he had unknowingly written it for all of them. What does it mean when an artist no longer sings the lyric alone? What does it say about healing, community, and the strange echo chamber between fan and idol? How does it feel when the most vulnerable line of your career becomes your legacy and your liberation? These questions hung in the air long after the lights dimmed and the final note faded. One cannot ignore the spiritual undertone that accompanied Jin's posture on stage that night. With his head slightly bowed, illuminated in white light, many fans described the moment as a penserahan, an enlightenment, a revelation not wrapped in grand speeches, but in sacred silence. It wasn't just the lyric. It wasn't just the song. It was the transformation of pain into power, of solitude into solidarity. That night, Epiphany wasn't just performed. It was relived. It was witnessed. And it was returned, with force, the resonance of that singular lyric, "I am the one I should love," sung in a moment of total synchronicity between artist and audience, exposed the emotional core of what BTS has long stood for. Not fame, not perfection, but connection, truth, and healing. And perhaps more than any elaborate choreography or chart-topping hit, it is this raw, unscripted truth that will outlive every tour and every album. As the crowd's voice filled the arena and Jin's fingers eventually returned to the keys, the song resumed. But the damage, beautiful, emotional, irreversible, had already been done. Jungkook exhaled. Jin blinked away the tears. And the world kept watching, breathless. The moment passed. But it did not end. But even as the concert moved forward, through dazzling light displays, electrifying transitions, and emotional solos, the echoes of that single moment refused to fade. Something had shifted, not only in the atmosphere of the Anaheim arena, but deep within the hearts of those present. Fans stood in stunned silence long after the song ended, many visibly weeping, clutching light sticks as if trying to hold onto a piece of something sacred they had just witnessed. And within that stillness was a profound understanding. This was not just a concert. It was a collective healing. Jin's return to the piano after that eruption of emotion was done with quiet resolve. His hands trembled only slightly as he picked up where he left off, but something had changed in his voice. It was softer, perhaps more fragile, but no less powerful. As he continued the song, each word hung heavier than before, each note carried by thousands of emotional histories that connected in that very moment. The singer who once wrote Epiphany as a private declaration now stood as its public embodiment, no longer hiding from the message, but illuminated by it. Jungkook, after a long pause, finally moved again. He didn't speak, but his eyes remained on Jin, visibly red, visibly shaken. For an artist so deeply tied to his youngs, especially Jin, the gravity of the moment couldn't be hidden behind a rehearsed smile. His silence, shared with the crowd, told a story far more profound than any scripted fan interaction could convey. Outside the arena, even hours after the concert concluded, fans were still singing the chorus. Videos showed clusters of armies gathered around the venue, softly repeating the refrain in various languages, as if continuing the ritual long after the music had stopped. It was not just celebration, it was tribute. A tribute to growth, to scars, to forgiveness. A tribute to Jin. A tribute to themselves. Social media platforms exploded with global reactions, and yet, None could encapsulate the full depth of what had happened in those minutes. Because what occurred that night wasn't easily understood through digital commentary or flashy headlines. It was something that had to be felt, to be lived. And for those who were there, the emotional residue would likely never leave them, and perhaps that's the point. When a song becomes more than melody, when it becomes a mirror, its legacy no longer belongs solely to the artist. It becomes a living, breathing memory shared by all who have ever needed to hear those words. I am the one I should love. Jin may have sung it first, but in Anaheim, the world sang it back. And in doing so, they reminded him, and themselves, that love, especially for oneself, is never a solitary act. The evening's finale returned to high energy, with encore stages that brought laughter, cheers, and moments of light-hearted relief. But no matter how brightly the show ended, the shadow of that epiphanic moment remained, the kind of silence that roars louder than sound. And when Jin and Jungkook exited the stage, side by side, fans couldn't help but wonder, what were they thinking? What words were left unsaid between them? Was there a silent understanding shared in that final glance? The answer remains unknown. But one truth was crystal clear. Something irreversible had occurred, not in spectacle, but in sincerity. As the tour moves forward to its next stop, Anaheim will remain a chapter apart, a turning point. A place where one song rose above all others, where one lyric became the heartbeat of an entire crowd, and where one artist stood in front of thousands and finally realized that he no longer had to sing those words alone. And that realization, perhaps, is the most powerful epiphany of all.